And there we are. Now we're back with the Sunday Mannin Line. I'm Roger Watterson. On the switch is Catherine Nicholl. And with me in the studio is another of our guests, Mike Percival. Now, in the first programme, Sunday Opinion, Robert Crane was our guest. He was the chairman of the Isle of Man TT Marshals Association, and of course they're now warming up because they'll be in full operation within a week's time, and they're getting all the packs out and getting all the people sorted out. It's quite a big task, and Robert took a little bit of time out to come and talk to us today ahead of all the work that he's now facing. Mike is with us, but for a completely different reason, because although he's not part of the organisation of the TT Marshals Association anymore. Good afternoon, Mike. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Roger.
But you've been a marshal. You've been the other side of the coin.
Absolutely, yes.
And still are.
I am.
Yeah.
I've been marshalling now for 50 years this year.
Well, why have you done that? Well,
I
mean,
love
in the
it.
sense that it's such a long time.
I enjoy it so much. I've never wanted to race. I've always ridden motorbikes since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. But racing never entered. I don't think I've got the killer instinct, to be honest. But I admire those that do, and I love the way they do it, and I'd like to see them continue being able to do it. And that means that by marshalling, I'm giving them something back for the entertainment they're giving me.
Yes. Well, as far as a marshal, I suppose, therefore, if you've been doing it for 50 years, you must have seen marshalling change quite a bit in those 50 years.
Oh, dramatically. When I started marshalling, well, I started marshalling up on the mountain part of the circuit. My father had a garage in Laxey, and he ran a coach from Laxey up to the mountain carrying the marshals. So from about 10 years old, I was automatically in the coach going up for the morning practices, the evening practices, the race days, and the mountain can be a very unforgiving place. But initially, when I started marshalling up on the mountain, your kit consisted of a cloth armband and a yellow duster. And the idea of the yellow duster was not to clean your glasses, but to hold it over your back as you ran down the course so the riders would have a chance of seeing you.
That sounds hairy.
Oh, yes, absolutely. OK, the bikes weren't going as fast as they do now, but nevertheless, at that point as well, marshals did go on the circuit while the circuit was still live, down the side of the road. You didn't think about it.
Is that the days when you used to have those little sort of half-moon shields to catch the flies in the front of the bike?
More or less, yes, yes. Well, as you can imagine, 50 years ago.
So that's the way it started from. But we'll moved on. Perhaps we can, during the course of our conversation, while we're waiting for calls and telephone calls to come in, we can cover a little bit of this. Let me remind you, of course, you are listening to the Mannin Line, which means that your contribution matters, and we'd like to hear from you, please. Not just about TT marshalling, but there's been quite a bit in the public domain this week, from the purchase of the steam packet, or about to go through, and the UK's attack on gambling and how that might affect our economy, changes to eye treatment at Nobles. Oh, there's so much more. Why don't you ring us up and talk about something that's caught your attention? And the number to ring, of course, is 66 13 68. You can text us at 166 177, or you can email to studio@manxradio.com. The telephone lines will be open in just about a couple of minutes. Welcome back to the Sunday Mannin Line. Now, let me remind you, I'm Roger Watterson. On the switch is Catherine Nicholl. She's there answering the calls now. So if you would like to talk to us, we'd be very pleased to talk to you on 66 13 68. And, of course, our earlier subject was the TT Marshals Association and the work that it does. Of course, we're not restricted to talking about that. We can do any subject you like today. It's a fairly open forum. And it could be the steam packet. Indeed, we have a text in already on it. But it could be any other subject that you might care to talk about or contact us. Phone calls would be more welcome, but we can take texts and emails. With me in the studio is Mike Percival. Now, Robert Crane was the chairman of the Isle of Man TT Marshals Association, and Mike has been a marshal, just as he told us before we went to the break, for some 50 years, from a small boy up to still doing it today. Mike, when I said the job has changed,
yeah,
in what way has it changed, apart from the fact that bikes are faster and the roads are different? But,
well, there's a lot more to take in mind, if you like. It's the job itself hasn't got more complicated, but the background you need to have has become more complicated. When somebody comes off at 80 miles an hour They can do just as much damage as coming off at 170 miles an hour. But with the modern machinery, there's a lot more you've got to bear in mind. The equipment the riders are using has changed. I mean, taking the helmets off, for argument's sake. When it was the pudding basin helmets or an open face helmet, that's quite simple. You can see where there's any damage to the face or the ears. Taking the helmet off was quite simple. Now, with the full face helmets, particularly the top makes such as Arai, getting the helmet off the rider without moving the rider's neck is very, very difficult. It's a two-person job. One person cannot.
Sometimes I just have to leave it alone, do you?
Well, there are circumstances where, yes, you do leave it alone, but we're trained. We go on courses which are organised by the TTMA, which gives us a basic grounding in first aid. It gives us it's called the incident management course, and it's incredibly useful. You get the first aid bit, you learn how to organise an incident when it happens, you become very aware of the sort of things that are going to happen, and you get some very good advice as part of it. The first and most important of which is you do not want to become involved in an incident.
How have you been involved?
Well, you don't want to become part of it.
Oh, I see. To me, not an emotional involvement. Then.
No, absolutely. This is purely, if you react too quickly, if you see a bike sliding down the road, so you leg it out into the road to go and help.
Well, that happened to one woman, didn't it?
Exactly. Unfortunately, a momentary lapse of concentration, and, well, we know what happened.
Yeah, the rider and her were killed, yes.
That's right. So this is the sort of thing that the incident management course teaches you. I've just gone on the course last weekend, and yet again, even though I've done the course so many times, it's just so useful. I've actually used what they teach in the course on an ordinary road traffic accident in Scotland, in fact, and it was just fascinating that part of my brain just kicked into gear, and I knew exactly what to do in what order to do it.
Robert did say during the programme that it was training that would be ususeful in other walks of life. Yes,
oh, very much so. Very much so. Right. Interestingly, when the ambulance arrived at the incident, I immediately stood up, reported that the casualty had been conscious throughout, had a broken collarbone, had minor cuts and abrasions, was otherwise okay. And the ambulance man looked at me and said, "Are you a paramedic?" And I said, "No, I'm a TT marshal from the Isle of Man." And he said, "You'll do for me, pal." That was lovely.
Very good. Roger, with regard to the steam packet buyout, says Peter, being a member of the tax and fare-paying public, I'm concerned that we're swapping one bunch of extortionists for another. The government will be seeking its costs back. Bonds will require dividends. Loans for 2 new ships, costs likely to be £120 million plus, and it'll need servicing. If the government really want to turn this island around and benefit local people and businesses through trade and tourism, and to get local people's support, the government should write off the £76 million loan element. I see no benefit to locals otherwise, and really think the Treasury simply see the steam packet as a cash cow. I don't know if that's entirely fair, that actually.
No, I agree with you. I think the government are doing exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. Okay, it could have been done years ago, but I think the steam packet have been kicked repeatedly by any number of organisations, and hopefully this move will stop the feet kicking it.
It is, and not only that, it will reveal exactly how it's been run, and I think perhaps better than we think sometimes. Right, now we've got our first caller on the line now, and it's Leslie. Good afternoon, Leslie.
How do you do?
Well, and you?
Good. My subject's Brexit, but as Mike's there, I have marshalled in the past. Bagaro, bottom of Bagaro, that's a long time ago. Right.
Good spot, though.
Now, about Brexit. Now, I can only quote what I read in the English newspapers. Now, the thing that seems to be gelling at the moment within the cabinet in the UK is that the UK leaves in March, but remains part of the customs union for a transition period when they get the technology sorted out to solve the problem with the Irish border. And in the time of the transition period, the UK will obey all the legislation if they were still a member of the EU, though they're not, Fair enough. Now, in March, if that happens, then the Isle of Man that's an associate member of the EU will also cease being an associate member, right? Now, we legislation on the Isle of Man, EU legislation, is applied to us and as an associate member.
I would say we're not actually associate member. We've got a special relationship. The associate membership never happened, actually. But it is.
Anyway, the point is legislation is slightly different on us. We have to comply with slightly different legislation, you see, slightly different. Anyway, what I'm thinking is this. After March, we could be lumped, when we're totally outside the EU, in the transition period, we could be lumped in with the UK, and Brussels may say, oh, the Isle of Man has to comply with legislation the same as a full member in that transition period. We don't know, right?
No, right.
Fair enough. Now, the thing is this. I have been told, and it should be verified by members of Tynwald, I have been told that there is EU competition legislation which applies to full members of the EU, but not to the Isle of Man, because we're slightly different, that states that exclusive agreements are illegal because they are deemed anti-competitive. Now, then they say, because this legislation doesn't apply to the Isle of Man, because we're not a full member, that's why the user agreement of the steam packet is legal. But you can understand, if we have to comply with full EU legislation, and what I've been told is correct, in March, the steam packet user agreement will cease because it will be no longer legal, and therefore the steam packet is worthless. So what I'm saying is this.
Well, it's not entirely worthless, is it?
What I'm saying is, can members of Tynwald who are listening to me now, can they check to see what I've been told is correct or not? Because if this legislation about exclusive agreements, I've been told, are illegal for full EU members, if I've been told what I've been told is incorrect, well, they've got nothing to worry about. No worries. But if it is correct, they should withhold the purchase of the steam pack until they've got clarification from Brussels, because it won't be the UK that will decide this, from Brussels, what legislation we will have to comply with after March. Is it full membership legislation, or what we are at the most same? Just go on the same as we are. But I just say I've said it now.
Okay,
so it's up to them.
Okay, Leslie. Well, that's fine.
They spend £124 million on something that's absolutely worthless.
Well, I don't know it's absolutely worthless because, of course, the purchase price reflects the fact there's very little time left to go on the user agreement, doesn't it?
Well, that's not what an MHK has said to me in a letter. I can just read a paragraph out if you want.
Okay.
Let me take a sec. Put my glasses on. The price being asked has also been assessed not just on the basis of the value of the assets, but on projected cash flow between now and 2026, when the present user agreement is due to expire.
Right.
Right. So in other words, basically, a lot of the price is on the user agreement continued to 2026.
Yeah, but that's not on the agreement, but on cash flow.
Well, basically, that's on cash flow. But if there's no agreement, then someone can come in March, and there'll be no cash flow because they won't be able to compete.
Well, we have to see. I've got a funny feeling that might not be the case. But seeing you asked the question,
Leslie, should verify whether this legislation I've been told is correct or not.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Right, that's Leslie with a fairly complicated question there as far as the EU is concerned, but he may be right, but we'll have to find out. I have a feeling, we did a programme some time back about steam packet ages ago when the Australians had their hands in there, and of course the onward sale value of the company was all based on the length of the user agreement, but there's not much of it left now.
Can I ask you a quick question, Roger? The user agreement, is that basically granting a monopoly to the steam packet?
Basically it did, yes. It didn't entirely, but they had a lot of rights in it, yes.
I thought so, because in the past, if you remember, Jeff Duke started up an alternative.
He did.
And there just simply was not enough business.
They cut each other's throats.
Oh, they did, completely.
Yes, they were both on the point of tipping over. Yes,
yeah, so even if there isn't a user agreement, anyone who decides to set up in opposition is going to go bankrupt very quickly.
Well, they will, unless they can pull a few things, whatever, out of the Now, let's see if I can bring Vivian on board. I can't just get this call to come up from Vivian. So what we do, just have a look at a text or two while I'm trying to do that. And Wilfred Tomlinson, our friend Roger, has sent in us a memo about the Positive Action Group, where he says that GDPR D-Day is here. That is, of course, to do with all the changes to the data protection and data recording and all the various things to go with it. Ian MacDonald, the Isle of Man's Information Commissioner, will be at the Manx Legion Club in Douglas on 7:30 on Monday, the 21st of May. After his presentation, the Information Commissioner then will willingly answer all sorts of questions from the various members of the public. So, the event is free and it's open to all. So that's just a text coming there. Yes, Mike, let's just go back to your, while we're waiting to get this call back, just go then back through to your marshalling activities with the TT course. Well, over 50 years you must have seen some interesting incidents. Huh?
Oh, I have. Some I'd prefer not to talk about, obviously. Yeah. But you've got to have immense amounts of patience. For a while I was the Deputy Sector Marshal at the Quarterbridge. It's a very good place for training marshals because it's a fairly low speed corner. People do fall off there, but generally speaking they jump back to their feet and they say, "I've broken my fairing," which is, as far as we're concerned, a good result. But when the top racers fall off, generally speaking they've got a red mist down. And I have fond memories of one of the current top racers falling off at the Quarterbridge. And the rule is, if they separate from their bike, that's it.
Right.
That session is over for them. They cannot go any further. No, not allowed to. If they remain attached to the bike, so to speak, we'll do a very quick inspection, make sure there's nothing obviously wrong, and they can continue.
They lose time. They lose time in that.
Well, they've fallen off the bike, so what can you expect? But this chap had fallen off, had separated from the bike. We were waiting for the dust to settle, as you're supposed to do. He leapt to his feet. He grabbed the bike, picked it up, and was about to set off again. And one of the marshals at the Quarterbridge had the immense presence of mind to stand astride the front wheel with his hands on the front of the fairing, shaking his head, because the rider obviously couldn't hear very much. He'd got his earplugs in and so forth. The rider eventually accepted this with, shall we say, not the best grace in the world, took his helmet off, threw it down the road, got off the bike, which was now supported by the marshal holding it from the front, and stomped off into Douglas, down Peel Road. We thought, oh dear, this doesn't look particularly good. But we moved the bike over out of the way, reported it into control. He went to race control to register a complaint. Now, when the riders register a complaint against a marshal or a group of marshals, they have to pay to do so.
Oh, right.
If the complaint is upheld, they get the money back. If, on the other hand, it's proved that they really shouldn't have wasted everyone's time, then the money goes into the pot. They very sensibly said to him, before you decide to make a complaint, can we just let you know that the marshals have been in touch to say that your gear lever was broken, your clutch lever was broken, your brake lever was broken, and the frame was actually cracked. We think that instead of registering a complaint, you should go back down, find the marshal who stopped you, and thank him for saving your life. Credit where credit's due. That's exactly what he did.
So it's a case of the heat of the moment.
Oh, absolutely. So the red mist comes down.
I suppose when they're in a race like that, there must be some sort of adrenaline surge.
Lord, yes. It's scary. They're not the same person when they do break down, and they're still in that mode. You're dealing with an alien creature.
Right. Well, let's come back down to earth then for a moment and talk to our next caller on the line. It's Vivian. Good afternoon, Vivian.
Good afternoon, Roger. I've enjoyed the conversations. Roger,
Yeah.
the TT.
Yes.
I think the organisers have got to be a little careful. Now, this year they've asked for 2 extra emergency practices. The Sunday afternoon, a lot of people can cope with, or a lot cannot. But the other one on the Friday is going to make it a very long day for marshals, and they are not considering the people of the Isle of Man, because the roads close at 12:30, I think it is, at lunchtime on the Friday. They open by 4:30, and they're closed again. I'm talking about down on the level, not up on the mountain road, and they're closed again at 6 o'clock.
Are these the extra ones in case of sort of emergencies or problems, aren't they? They're not absolutely definite. They're just a contingency.
But as we know from other times, I think if they think they've got a chance of using them, they will use them. I'm a supporter for TT. Look, please don't get me wrong there. But I mean, I just think they need to be a little careful, because they could ruin it for themselves.
Right. Okay. Well, there is. You heard we were talking about it earlier. Of course, the biggest problem is sometimes for some of the marshals the amount of time that they have to spend on location.
I know all about marshalling. I had a family that marshalled, and I did back in the early days. But I just think they do need to be careful.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for telling us that, Vivian. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Do you ever have had that problem, Mike? You've been stuck there for yonks?
Oh, very much so. These days, I am now what's called a response marshal. They give me a car. I have a team of marshals in with me. I'm positioned in Parliament Square. Once the roads are closed, the control come on to us and say, response car 1, which is me, we're short 2 marshals at Joey's, 1 at the Black Hut. You have permission to enter the course. Now, this is on closed roads, of course. So off I set from Parliament Square, driving somebody else's sports car on closed roads, which is a terrible job, of course, and nobody else would want to do it. Dropping off the marshals in the locales that are needed.
Scaring the wits out of your passengers.
Well, no, actually, they also seem to find it quite amusing. But hey, but that means that we end up on the mountain. And yes,
can you get back in time?
Well, the course is one way over the mountain, TT, which means that somebody else has to bring the guys I've dropped off at, for argument's sake, Joey's, up to the Black Hut where I am. There are buses that come over and so forth, picking up marshals. But yes, it can be very late indeed by the time we get down off the mountain. We did have, and it has been sorted, a slight hitch some years ago when one of the chaps with the DOT, I think they were then, I'm not sure what they're called these days, was determined that he was going to get all his cones gathered in and set out and all the signage back up before a single marshal was allowed to leave the mountain. And this has now been resolved. The guys doing the cones and the signs are absolutely superb with the marshals. Big cheery waves, smiles. They do everything they can to help us. And as a consequence, of course, we do everything we can to help them.
It does sound as if there's quite I don't know if the word is fraternal, but there's a club instinct. There seems to be, as if all people... Is there an area of bonhomie amongst everybody?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. Particularly if you marshal regularly in a set position, you will get to know the team that you're marshalling with and the sort of the previous position and the next position on. And there will be a good repartee between those groups. The mountain is a completely different kettle of fish. If you are a mountain marshal, then you know the other mountain marshals, and you all have a very good mutual understanding and respect.
But it's interesting that so many people do this for so long. And as I said to Robert earlier, not just the locals like yourself, people from the Isle of Man who've been doing it for years, but people who come from all sorts of places at great expense to themselves in some instances, not just the travelling, but their accommodation and everything else that goes with it, for absolutely no reward whatsoever.
No, that's right. I met a lovely couple from Sweden a couple of years ago who were in one of the other response cars. They come over nearly every year to marshal from Sweden on their motorbikes. wonderful, fabulous people.
Now, there's nothing to do with marshals, but of course the messages are going out already about people who are motorcyclists or motorists indeed. And there's a plea gone out in the last day or two already for drivers to be a little more patient on the Douglas Promenade. Seems these days there's several reports of dangerous overtaking of horse trams just yesterday alone.
Yeah.
It's,
I think part of this is down to the fact that the parking on the side of the promenade, a lot of vehicles are wider than they used to be. And there simply is not room in a lot of places to get past the horse tram and the parked cars.
Tight fit, aye.
Yeah, and people are losing their patience.
Yes. Well, yeah, okay. Now, coming back to the marshals for a moment, Robert, we were talking about people who were interested and might like to sign up. 618-191 is the telephone number, which will be opening tomorrow. info@iomtt.com. You can communicate with them because there's, as I said, there's room for more.
Oh, Lord, always room for more.
Yeah.
And any novice marshal will automatically be placed with experienced marshals, and you won't be treated as an idiot or a lunatic or whatever. You will be treated with respect, and you will be shown exactly what to do. You won't be expected to do a job until you are aware of what that job entails.
Yes, well, of course, there's obviously considerable safety implications there as well to make sure that works.
Absolutely.
Right, let's take a break.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
And welcome back to the last part of today's Mannin Line. The telephone lines are still open, 66 13 68, and texts can come in to 166177 or emails to studio@manxradio.com. I have one here, which is a question, Mike, which probably you should answer, seeing you were saying that you're based at Parliament Square in Ramsey and have been in the past. The question is, why is there so many marshals at Parliament Square? The correspondent here is suggesting that too many of them is the cause of all the camera bubble.
Right. There are several locations around the island where you will find a plethora of orange jackets. Quarterbridge is one, Ballacrane is another, Parliament Square is another. There are basically two reasons why you will have a large number of marshals. Quarterbridge and Ballacrane, usually because they're very good training points. You'll find that quite a few of the marshals, usually about 50% or more, are novice marshals. So they can't really be counted as a full marshal until they've received their training.
That's the 10 times.
That's right.
Yeah.
But they're both very good locations to get them trained up. Because as I said earlier on, Quarterbridge and Ballacrane are both slow-speed corners. People do come off there, so they get the opportunity of actually dealing with things and using the brushes. Parliament Square is a different kettle of fish. It's a very complicated corner. You need a full set of marshals for the entrance to the corner. You need a full set of marshals for the exit to the corner. Generally speaking, if there is an incident at Parliament Square, it's not one bike. It's often two, possibly three. And if you've only got...
What do you mean? They hit each other? Or
they
one
hit
slides
each other,
into the
one
other,
slides
or
into another, and any number of things can happen. As a consequence, you have got to have sufficient marshals to cover eventualities. Yes, hopefully it won't happen for a whole year or more. In which case, yes, everyone will say, oh, look, there's far too many marshals there. Why don't they go and marshal somewhere else? But on the off chance that something does happen, that's when you desperately need the number of marshals you've actually got there.
It's a sort of insurance policy, isn't it?
In effect, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Covering the eventualities.
Yeah. I mean...
So when people go through Parliament Square, why is that likely to be an accident spot? Because they're not going very fast.
You'd be surprised just how fast they are going through Parliament Square. They come into the square and you'll often see the back wheel well up off the ground as they come in Lizère Road to Parliament Square. They're braking so hard. That means the whole bike is unbalanced, and then they flick it over through what amounts to a 90-degree angle. With the bike unbalanced, the back wheel has only just gone back down on the road.
And then there's like a S-bend, a wiggle, isn't
That's
it?
right. You've got the wiggle in the middle, and then you've got out past Ray Motors to head up onto the mountain. It's tricky. It's very tricky. And at the speeds they're doing, I mean, they're coming into the square at probably 130. They break down to 60, 70 miles an hour, I would imagine, to take a right-angle corner. That's fast, especially on the road surface that isn't a racetrack. It's a road surface.
Yes, an ordinary road.
Yeah.
With all bits in it. Well, not traffic lights exactly there, but crossings and all sorts in it.
That you will find that from time to time you will get a group of marshals who, I marshal here, I'm not going to marshal anywhere else. Well, fair enough. They've got their team. They know exactly what each member of that team is going to be doing in the event of an incident. You can't really argue with them on that score.
So taking the answer, go back to our correspondent's question, because you've answered his question why there's so many of them there.
Yeah.
But from the point of view of incident likelihood, are there many accidents at Parliament Square?
No more than an awful lot of other places around the course, Roger. It's also a black flag section, so there are various points around the course which are called black flag points. If a rider is noticed to have his exhaust dragging on the ground, or something is visibly wrong with the bike, or it's smoking very heavily, race control will come in and say, black flag, number 35, blue plate. So they are pulled into Parliament Square. So you've now got 2 or 3 marshals. It's not an incident. He's been black flagged, but they have to be there. The TM, the travelling marshal, will now have a look at the bike and decide whether he's fit to go on or not. But the marshals are now tied up with him. Meanwhile, the racing is still continuing. So
you need
bodies.
I'm getting a criticism here. Just wondering when Roger last saw the TT. They're fast. Well, I think I worked that out.
No kidding.
Yes, I wouldn't have known that. Yes. Right.
Over 200 miles an hour down the Selby Straight. That's fairly quick.
Yes, I think I might have worked that one out. As far as you've been doing this for so long, what's your wife's reaction to it? Is she interested? Because your house used to be bang on the TT course.
That's right. It's the original start-finish for the first 3 years they used the mountain circuit. She, I won't say tolerates, she likes the TT, but she's never marshalled. She never will marshal. I suppose, halfway between likes and tolerates. She enjoys the atmosphere that happens on the island. She would certainly not want to go off the island for TT. And we have homestay with us, so...
Okay. I see the steam packet, of course, are offering special deals to go the other way on the boats when the TT is on now.
Absolutely, but I certainly wouldn't want to take them up on that.
Right. Well, there we are. Now, look, we've just got to 7 minutes to the end of our programme, which means we've plenty of room yet to take your texts or emails or your phone calls. Let me remind you, as if you don't know already, the number is 66 13 68. You can text to 166 177 or email to studio@manxradio.com. We go back far enough, Mike. I mean, you used to be a member of the Manx Radio's team in days gone by.
I did indeed. Yeah. There were occasional either TTs or MGPs, but surprisingly never both in the same year. When I was a timekeeper in Parliament Square, in the window of Ray Motors, which was fascinating because as they accelerated out of the square, they came straight towards me. It was a bit worrying. That was the case. I had a telephone, not a mobile phone, because we didn't have those then.
Oh, you were lucky to have one.
We had a telephone, so I used to ring Peter Neal in the grandstand and tell him the time differences in Ramsey, which I always was fascinated by the fact that he'd have a telephone to one ear, headphones on, listening to somebody else commentating, and still be able to break in and give these times out as I was giving them to him. He had a wonderful mind, that man. Quite impressive.
Yes, well, Charlie Webster, who you may remember, producer of these programmes of years gone by as well. Charlie's first time but he was sent up to the bungalow. And he did much the same as you, except he had to use 2p pieces in the AA box.
No, at least this was a landline, a fixed line, so I didn't have to do that.
We desperately need some improvements, says Debbie, to the access road. Most residents of the Isle of Man are happy to put up with the inconvenience of the TT, but using the access road is a complete nightmare. And I know lots of people, myself included, won't use it unless absolutely necessary. Even a foot wider here and there would make a significant difference. It's the old railway line, of course.
Yes, I agree. A foot wider here and there would make a big difference. But she says she would only use it in the case of emergency. Well, that's what it's there for.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we have got an access road at all is brilliant. For many, many years, there was no way. If you were inside the course, that was it.
Well, I've used it to go to the hospital before now. There's a bit of a slalom at the other end up around the housing estate, but you've just got to be careful.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Well, it is there. It has at least you're not blocked out or have to walk miles to go over a bridge. Right, okay. So anybody else, any comments, please? Because we've just literally got 4 minutes left to go now before we come to the end of our programme. And today we've been basically taking a look at the TT Marshals Association. I did suggest you might like to chip in about the steam packet. We've had 2 comments about that, but not a great deal at the moment. I should tell you we'll probably be doing a Sunday opinion programme on the subject after the TT weeks and after the Jamboree is over. We'll be getting down to look at some of our more serious subjects again, including, of course, the issues with data now and not just data protection, but other things as well. Just to remind you about data protection, by the way, Ian MacDonald will be one of our studio guests in one of the programmes, but he's also is a guest of the Positive Action Group, which is holding a meeting on Monday night, 21st of May, which starts at 7 o'clock in the evening, or 7:30 it is, at the Manx Legion Club in Douglas. GDPR D-Day is here is the presentation by Ian MacDonald, and after his presentation he'll be there to take any questions as well. The event's free and open to all of you. Yes, this EU computer thing's now going to cause a lot of problems.
I must admit there's a side to it that somebody has suggested which mildly worries me. I have on my computer at home my Christmas card list.
You have to write to everybody asking, may you send them one?
Exactly. This is the whole problem. This classes as data protection.
Yes.
So where do I stand? Do I have to bin my Christmas card list?
Mind you still send Christmas cards?
Yes. I've not gone totally onto social media yet.
Yes. It's I think it's sad, but you notice that Christmas cards, whilst they're still about, there's not so many of them. I think the postage is what's killing it, really, isn't it?
Yes. And it's so much easier to go onto Facebook, where hopefully you've got...
It's not the same, is it?
Oh, no way.
You can't put your phone on the mantelpiece.
I dislike Facebook anyway.
We've been lately, I don't know if you've ever had electronic Christmas cards where you have this picture which plays music and cartoons do things. That's another one that's...
Yes, quite. Call me a traditionalist if you wish, but no, thank you. I prefer a Christmas card I can put up on the mantelpiece.
Well, there we are, yes. Right, now, just about a minute and a half to go. Well, thank you, Mike. Are you marshalling again this year?
I am indeed, yes. Response car 1 again. And again, as far as I'm aware, I'll be based in Parliament Square.
Yes, right. So it's a repeat. It's interesting. I'm curious when Robert was talking about people coming from all over the world, and how you go about it. I'm just wondering, do you ever have any language difficulties? Have you ever found any difficulty in understanding each other?
No, not really. You explain to the spectators, the French ones, the German ones, the Italian ones. Hand signals work wonderfully. They cotton on very quickly. Right. And usually you'll find somebody in the crowd who speaks a smattering of the 2 languages required and will happily translate.
Now, would you believe 3 tests are coming at the last 30 minutes? If you live inside the course, i.e. Glenvarn, the access road is the only way to get out, otherwise we're trapped, not just in emergencies. Yeah. If regards the TT, they're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. It was once billed as the greatest free show on earth. If you look around the course, there are more and more restricted areas and more spectating areas you have to pay. The question has to be asked, is this not just greed, says Steve? And introducing a 50-mile-an-hour limit on the coast road is just another thing to go against the TT Festival. This is the only option for people from the north to get to work in Douglas during the racing and practice. No wonder the locals are getting fed up with the TT period.
I do agree with the speed limits that extend themselves each TT week and then don't seem to shrink back to where they should be.
I was about to say, they stay extended, don't they?
They do.
Particularly up to Ballahutchin or something. Anyway, Mike, we are at the end of the programme. Thank you for joining us on the Mannin Line today. Mike Percival was our guest. Catherine Nichol was on the switch. And I'm Roger Watterson. And I won't be back next week, but I'll be back the week after.